GitHub and DevOps with Brian Randell.
The Azure DevOps podcast is a show for developers and DevOps professionals shipping software using Microsoft technologies. Each show brings you hard-hitting interviews with industry experts, innovating better methods, and sharing success stories. Listen on to learn how to increase quality, ship quickly, and operate well. And now your host, Jeffrey Palermo.
Welcome to the show. I'm Jeffrey Palermo, your host for helping you and your teams move fast and deliver quality and to run your software with confidence in Azure, all while using everything that the .NET ecosystem has to offer. The podcast is sponsored by ClearMeasure, a full-service software architecture and engineering firm that serves companies that are building mission-critical software systems. Quick announcement, we're in the full second year of my architect forums. You can sign up for the next session in the link in the show notes. If you lead a group of .NET developers and you're looking to collaborate with others who do the same, your peers, you can sign up for the link and participate with us on that virtual video meeting. And I've also launched my new software executive leadership forums for technical executives who oversee software engineering groups, from CTOs down to senior managers. If you oversee those groups in your company but don't directly work on the code and jump in with them, this forum is for you, and it'll focus on topics specific to management, leadership for those groups. And if you're a developer listening and you would love your boss to be in that, then pass it along. And for those looking for Programming with Palermo, my video podcast, you can just search for it in any of the directories and you'll be able to find it. My guest today on the show is Brian A. Randell, and he's a staff developer advocate at GitHub, where he works to help tell the good word about GitHub and how it can help you deliver solutions faster and more securely. For more than 30 years, he's been building software solutions, and as a partner at MCW Technologies, he educated teams on Microsoft technologies via writing and training, both in person and on demand. And he's been a consultant for companies small and large worldwide, including Fortune 100 companies like Microsoft. Brian is a passionate software craftsman who still enjoys coding as he helps teams to improve their processes from idea to release. And he received the Microsoft MVP award for 18 years and has co-authored books and has written magazine articles and more. And when not working, Brian enjoys spending time with his wife, 2 children, dog, and extended family. And even before the word DevOps was coined, he wrote a book on application lifecycle management as one of them. And Brian, so glad to have you on the show. Welcome. How are you?
I'm wonderful, Jeffrey. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. Now, your world has been very busy with GitHub Universe, just being a few months ago and just being in the Azure DevOps space for so long, and then kind of coming over and joining GitHub. But before we jump into that, you have a multi-decade career. And for those listeners who haven't, read anything of yours or heard you speak at a user group or conference, I want to back up a little bit like I like to do and just ask, what were the kind of formative changes in your career that led you to realize, okay, it's not just code, but I like helping coders do it better, and you kind of shifted your focus. What were those moments, and how did that shape your career?
Yeah, that's a great question. When I got started in software, if you do the math, I've been around for a while.
Mm-hmm.
I got started on HP 3000 mini computers doing JCL, RPG, and COBOL. I started as a sysop, so I started kind of on that, what we often call the IT pro side of the house. And then I moved into software development, building Windows front ends to talk to the 3000, et cetera. What changed for me on this desire to not only do it, but to help, and there's both that help teams as everything from, my team, as well as helping other teams, and then to get into the, dare I say, we call the educational space, was I went to tech ed, and it was the second, I think, tech ed of all time, or third. We have to look on Wikipedia or something, but it was in New Orleans, and I just was enamored. You want to talk about fanboy moment? I went to these talks and I watched these people speak, and I was like, I want to do that. And, this is, pre-internet being a big thing. We didn't have video on demand. You got printout copies of the slides. I mean, this is,
Yeah, right.
old school stuff, and, literally, there's thousands of people there at the show. And I'm just like, this is great. And I had taken speech and debate in high school. So I never had any impediments in getting up on stage and talking. To me, it was just an extension of doing what you and I are doing.
Yeah.
And so those two things together then progressed to where I would, do presentations for customers, kind of do training. And then when I left the first company I started at and joined what at the time were called Microsoft Solution Providers, we were involved with Microsoft, and I went and spoke at events for them and user groups, this progression. And then the big thing came when I spoke at TechEd 19. Oh, again, we're dating myself. So this had to be 95, 94. We'll have to check, maybe 96, right in one of those 3 years in Los Angeles. And I did a presentation with Niels Hansen and Lizzie Parker. Lizzie was at Microsoft at the time. And we did a presentation on the big stage. And I remember not feeling, too worried about it until you realized at the end they had broadcasted during what they called Worldwide Live, where you could go watch in the movie theaters. Remember, pre-internet, folks, right? It wasn't just streaming. And they turned the lights on, and there's like 4,000 or 5,000 people in the audience. You're just like, okay, this is killer. But that really hooked me. And from then on, I was hooked on both the adrenaline of doing a presentation, but also those light bulb moments when you're able to transfer knowledge to someone and make their life better. To me, that is the greatest thing we have to give. And then it just progressed into from the teaching people development, right? And I focused at the time on VB and COM and stuff in the late 90s. And then, like everyone, I moved into .NET. But it was in the early 2000s where I was like, we need to do more for the team. And then that progressed into this, SDLC to ALM to DevOps progression. And the, kind of that distinction, and I know you're into this, there's the software development processes, and we have all the different things that fall under the umbrella of agile and non-agile. And then there's the technology side, which is, okay, I can talk about it all day long, but if I'm going to build a house, I need my tools, and what tools are going to do that. And so I like to be both a person who can talk about it conceptually, and then when possible, let's apply the best in breed tools. And what I like about working at GitHub, and what I loved about always doing stuff with Microsoft, is I use the tools daily and I believe in them. Are they perfect? No software is perfect, but I think they're really good. And I think when you properly understand how to use them, both non-technical process stuff and technical, that's where you get. So that's the long-winded answer to how did I get into this? It was just, I saw other people do it, and I had to do it. And I've been blessed to be doing it for a long time.
Nice. And you've advised the VSTS and then Azure DevOps team over the years, and now you're kind of joined GitHub. Just for people who may have read your works and haven't been keeping up, what is your focus today at GitHub?
So I have a fantastic job as a developer advocate. My job is to tell the world about how GitHub can help you build great solutions, but without selling you, which is what I've tried to always do in the past. I mean, I've been accused sometimes of being too positive and too salesy occasionally, but that's just the passion, coming through. It's, again, I know our software is not perfect, news release, go figure. But I believe in putting the best foot forward and trying to find the best way to do things. And, GitHub, like even Microsoft, we recognize at times that the solution offered by us isn't necessarily going to be always fit everybody. Therefore, we have a rich ecosystem, we have partners and ways of integrating. But as a developer advocate, my job is to both talk to you, but it's a two-way street. I want to hear, I want to listen, and then go back to the engineering teams and the product teams and say, look, this is a pain point. And while we have people, if you're, say a large, auto manufacturer, you may have a dedicated GitHub representative. You may have some people that talk to you on a regular basis. So they represent the company interest. I don't represent anyone in particular other than you, the listener, the individual. So you see me at a show, you send me email, you reach out to me on Twitter. I will always do my best to translate that info back. Now, I'm one person going against the grain, but my role and what we do as both users and practitioners is to give that feedback to the team and make the products better, and then show the world how they can be used. And so that's from early videos to presentations to all those things, and I'll speak at conferences and do a talk on, here's how you apply CoPilot. And then as my background being in .NET, I'll focus on primarily doing it as a .NET developer, whereas some of my colleagues, are better at Python or JavaScript, et cetera. And so as part of a larger team, our goal is to represent a broad swath of the developer audience. And so it's a fantastic job. And I'm just, it's an extension of what I always did as a consultant. It's just now, I get paid every 2 weeks, which is kind of cool. I did, doing the consulting job. It was, and you can relate as someone who runs a consulting company, is you got to keep your pipeline always filled. Luckily, someone else at GitHub does it, and I'm happy to support them. And our sales and revenue folks are awesome. They do that, but their job is to sell. I have to understand basics of, here's what things cost. These things cost money. These are free. And we give, if you're doing anything open source, we give them almost everything that GitHub makes is available for free when you're doing open source.
Mm-hmm.
But when it does come to, charging, I can, tell you, well, if you want this for private repos, this is going to cost you money. But I don't do licensing. I don't do that stuff. I will be happy to introduce you to my wonderful colleagues who will do that and can enable your company. But my job is more to show you the technical value and how it's going to help your company and you as an individual deliver value more effectively.
Mm-hmm. With the GitHub universe being so recent, there were things and announcements there, and with CodeLens and CoPilot, I want to ask you about that. But are there any other really big the workspaces? Are there any other really big use cases or parts of the GitHub ecosystem that developers not just need to keep an eye on, but hey, they really need to start adopting now because they're really good right now?
Well, so CoPilot on its own, let's be clear, there's GitHub Copilot, which is available in kind of 3 flavors: for individuals, for business, and for enterprise. And for the first 2, individual and business, anyone can do that. We don't care where you keep your code. They're optimized for experiences inside VS Code, Visual Studio, as well as we have support in NeoVin and with our partners at JetBrains. That's step 1. You should be looking at that. And what I tell people, particularly, Copilot's been out now for a few years, surprisingly, is if you tried it when it first came out and were not impressed, you should try it again. It's really got improved, especially as a C# developer. I remember how, I'll be honest, I was unimpressed. I was like, this is kind of getting in my way. It was kind of when I first got IntelliSense back in the 90s. I'll tell people that, when it first started, I was like, why is this awesome? I can type faster than this thing. It's getting in the way.
Mm-hmm.
Well, take away my IntelliSense, my statement completion, my tools like, JetBrains has their tools, like ReSharper, that people, you take those away from them, they'll hurt you. And so CoPilot's going to be the same way, is that you're going to wonder how you worked without it. It's an evolving set of technology. It keeps getting better. And today it really is, I think, fundamentally amazing. And when used correctly, and this is the thing, right? People sometimes just say, okay, I'm going to type a sentence and I just expect magic. And we're working on that. We continue to try and find those magical moments.
Yeah.
But there are ways to get more out of Copilot. That's one of the things we do a lot of stuff on, is, not just evangelizing, but educating people on here's how to get out of this. So like I show a lot of times when I do my Copilot talk, one of my tips is Copilot looks at context of what's open. So having a few open tabs relative to what you're already working on gives it so much more context where it'll do things the way you do it, right? Now, the bad news is garbage in, garbage out, okay? On the other hand, if you have a way of doing things, let's say data access, it will pick up on that. It will look at things. One of the things I do is, and I know you've done databases for a long time. With SQL Server, we have the SSDT tools.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things you can do in there is you can go in Visual Studio proper, you can design a table. And you have the visual designer, and then you have the code designer. Well, when you start using the code designer with Copilot, if you've already designed a couple of tables and you have a few open, it will look at how you do things like say, well, how do you like to do your title fields, your description fields? Well, there's the defaults that SSDT uses, but CoPilot is cool. When it realizes that, oh, you prefer, say, nvarchar 256 over nvarchar 50, it will do that. And those are those little moments where you go, now you're helping me.
Yeah.
Right. You're not fighting me. And so when we think about CoPilot, right, there's CoPilot there. Then there's what we introduced at Universe last year, and then now with GA earlier this year is CoPilot Enterprise. And that's where you need to have your code in GitHub. That's where you're going to have a compelling experience inside github.com. And as we've been doing enhancements over the last few months, that's going to translate to the experience you have in your IDE. So you can continue to use it like just say, let's say you're using Azure DevOps. That's fine. It'll work great on your client side. But if you want any of the server-side experiences, you want that cloud experience, your code's going to have to live inside a GitHub repo. And then from there, we are bringing the power of AI and CoPilot to other parts of the system around things like pull requests, around security. GitHub Advanced Security, our new thing is focused on not just finding things, but fix. So found means fix. That's going to be something you're going to hear a lot about the rest of the year. We're going to have some great announcements at Universe. And in fact, if you were to head out to the GitHub blog, especially by the time this episode makes it live, you'll see we've announced and released and previewed some new features to show you that power of AI coming together. And so I think the thing to realize is the train has left the station. AI is going to be a part of how we build software development tools for the foreseeable future. And just like you sit down to a modern editor and expect IntelliSense style features, statement completion, et cetera, you're going to have things infused with AI. Sometimes they may feel gimmicky. Sometimes they may not be awesome, but that is where we're going. So as a developer, rather than try and fight it and say, and you can write code in Notepad. You can do .NET development in Notepad. I wouldn't want to,
right?
But if you want to be a Luddite and avoid the next revolution, that's fine. I think what's more important is to figure out where do things like CoPilot save you time and get rid of the drudgery so that you can focus on the innovation part, right? I don't know about you, but I've never had an organization, that's come to me and said, we have one project. When we get that done, we're going to be perfect. What I'm sure you find, Jeffrey, with your teams and your consulting and the people you talk to is there's more work that we can get done. And so what we want to focus on with things like CoPilot is we're not trying to replace you. It is that assistant to get rid of the stuff that just has to be done. Think about the frameworks we use and the way we create, auto generation and templates, T4 and all those different things. They're all designed around the same thing. Get rid of the repetitive stuff so that the human can bring their creativity, their knowledge, and deliver that real value.
Yeah. On the CoPilot front, and this is just local. This isn't even on github.com, just locally in Visual Studio. One of my favorite features is not even in C#, but by just getting a jump start generating the markup for plant UML or mermaid diagrams, and then of course use the plugin right in Visual Studio to say show me the diagram, starting with one particular type in my code, like sequence diagram or block diagram, and it doesn't, and that's another, and IntelliSense inside plant UML markup. There's no tool that gives you IntelliSense, but it'll give IntelliSense inside kind of anything almost.
Yeah, the quality of the answers will vary based upon the type of data, right? Languages like JavaScript, Python, that affect the training set are going to be much broader. C# though is gotten really good, and again, it's not just on what we trained it on; it works in combination with what we have and what we call the context, which is in your editor, and that's why it'll do things. Now, sometimes it'll do silly things like if there isn't a good thing that it can figure out, you'll sometimes see it repeat what it's already got. And you've probably seen this when you've used ChatGPT, et cetera, where they get themselves into a loop where they're like, that's all I got. I have nothing more to tell you. But yeah, it is phenomenal how it can infer. And I think that's the key thing. When people first saw it, they were like, oh, well, it's just going out to a database and it's finding a block of existing code and shoving it out there. No, it is generative.
Mm-hmm.
And that means it is using this, internal logic to generate an answer. And that answer can be out of, poof, magic, out of empty air. And so, yeah, that's the thing is I just tell people, try it and just understand that what we call one shot, that very first time you do it, like to say a new project may not be as interesting. In fact, the answer is maybe something you're not really thrilled with. It's when you've started to build something, you actually start getting that foundation laid, that you're going to start to see the power. But then that's where we're going. You mentioned CoPilot Workspace, which is currently a research project. We haven't announced any productization of it, but we're really excited about where we've been going with the research, and we've been allowing people to try it, is going beyond that, which is helping you get started from the foundation, where I can take the definition in a PBI, a product backlog item, in a user story, and use that to generate entire sections of my application. But again, if it's going to do it, you're going to have laid that groundwork. So we're trying to find that balance, which is, how do we help you with file new, which is what a lot of people try and demo sometimes when they're not thinking about Copilot, versus that brownfield experience, which we know everyone has. Yep. I'm sure you walked into an organization. When was the last time, Jeffrey, that you got into an organization and said, guess what? It's all clean. You can do whatever you want. You can use any tech you want.
Yeah.
No, the constraints that we run into the enterprise are always, we have existing code, we have existing systems, we have to make them work together. Yep. And that's where I think, CoPilot Workspace and some of the stuff we're doing there is just going to bring that next level. Again, we know in building applications, there is that foundational bit of code that is always necessary. We need certain security code, certain authentication code. How do I talk to the database? How do I read something out of Key Vault? Once we get that kind of stuff working, we have to try and put them into libraries, right? Because we don't want to write it again, right? Mm-hmm. Developers were lazy by nature, right? That's why we embrace clipboard inheritance, right? Because if I can even just copy and paste it, I'll do that over having to write it again, right? Because we want to do the new stuff. And so I think tools like Copilot and Copilot Workspace, the ideas we have coming, is, again, remove the repetitive and get to the more good stuff, because there's no lack of good stuff your customers want.
For sure, for sure.
Many thanks to our podcast sponsor, ClearMeasure. ClearMeasure is a software architecture company that empowers clients' development teams to be self-sufficient, moving fast, delivering quality, and running their systems with confidence. Whether starting a new project or developing new technologies or techniques, ClearMeasure sets up your team to deliver world-class results. Learn more at www.clearmeasure.com. ClearMeasure, empowering software delivery. ClearMeasure is also happy to be a sponsor of the video podcast, Programming with Palermo. Watch, learn, and program alongside Chief Architect Jeffrey Palermo. Videos are added weekly and available on syndicated locations supporting video podcast or by visiting palermo.network. Tune in today.
Now, you've bridged the different worlds that could be competing, could be either or. You went super deep in Azure DevOps when it was still VSTS, when it was still TFS, and even before. Yep. And you've seen every tool out there available for .NET developers when it comes to the software development lifecycle and build, test, deploy, monitor, and all that stuff. And so at one point in time, the strategic message was, okay, everybody using Azure DevOps, let's get over to the GitHub suite of offerings. And so now, how are you talking to .NET development teams when you're saying, okay, hey, for every team, we want to be on the best of breed, the best current setup, whatever mix that is? How do you tend to advise? What's the current, generally best setup?
So, if you're doing net new, GitHub is the future as far as our long-term North Star at Microsoft and GitHub. That's today's messaging. Now, as you've been around, messaging changes, right? I am not, for better or worse, and there's probably for better for a lot of people, I am not the CEO of GitHub. I am not Thomas Domke, and I'm not the CEO of Microsoft. I am not Satya. So everything I say is based upon what I've been told and what I understand to be good and true. So let's be clear about that. You know, you watch this recording at a point in time. It is a point in time understanding. The current point in time is, you know, we've evolved what happened. We as Microsoft and GitHub were arguably a bit aggressive in this idea that we're going to have everybody move. So let's put it this way. If you're a net new customer, I would encourage you to look at GitHub as your long-term provider of solutions, particularly if it meets all your needs. And there's a lot of needs that go into complex setups, you know, from the small team, the startup, to a large enterprise. Now, there are certain complexities for modern software, everything from your SSO provider to what cloud you use and all those things. And so it's not always one size fits all. Between Microsoft and GitHub, I think we have the two best of breed products in the market. Azure DevOps is an excellent tool and set of technologies. And so, you know, there's net new. Now, let's start with what I think there's a root in your, you know, if I look at the root of your question for a lot of listeners is, you know, Microsoft has promoted Azure DevOps and its derivative titles over the years as the solution.
Yeah.
Yet now they have this GitHub thing. Well, we're on Azure DevOps. Should we be moving? So the first thing is, you really don't want to be self-hosting if you can avoid it, right? So let's start there. You want to be in the cloud. So if you're self-hosting an Azure DevOps server, and you definitely should not have a TFS server anymore. Right. It really needs to be Azure DevOps. Get to the cloud, right? You really want to be in the cloud in general. You know, the thing I always tell people is that, you know, backups aren't interesting. It's restores that are sexy. And the thing is, when you talk to people about how they take care of their internal servers, unfortunately, development servers aren't always given the love they deserve. Now, I've been wrong. I've worked with organizations over the years, and I've seen huge Azure DevOps, aka TFS deployments that had all the disaster recovery, had the multi-site failover. You know, yes, you can do it right. I just find normally it's not done right.
Yeah.
And in this age of ransomware and all these other things, you know, even though Microsoft is not perfect and we continue to, you know, make ourselves better with things like security and protection, we spend billions of dollars on it. So the cloud for most organizations is going to be a win, and that's going to be with GitHub.com or Azure DevOps in the cloud. Now the thing people say though is, okay, well, we're on Azure DevOps, but I see this GitHub Enterprise stuff. And I go, yes. Today, if you're doing it and you like Azure DevOps, you should feel comfortable with that investment. We have no intention of pulling the plug on it today or tomorrow. Now, at some point, that'll probably happen. When it does, we will then address that and look at what that means for you as a customer. But that's like when we killed VB. You know, VB6 Classic, yeah, the IDE we dropped support after 10 years. But guess what? Your VB runtime apps still run. You know, so, you know, if any company is committed to the past, it's Microsoft.
And you can still install VB6. You can trick it and it still works.
Oh, yeah. You know, right. Because that's the reality. Now, we don't support that, but you can, you know, we're not going to turn your software off. Right. So let's be clear. Now, there is a point where you're costing your organization time and money, and you're opening yourself up to security issues if that's what you're still doing. And so the point is, if we decide to say today, the announcement comes out, Satya says Azure DevOps is dead, fine. You got 10 years. That's the standard Microsoft behavior. But we have not announced that. So for now, what I'm telling people is, look, what features in Azure DevOps serve you well, and maybe don't have a GitHub equivalent. Like right now, GitHub does not have equivalents to the testing tools. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to encourage you to keep using those because I think that's appropriate. On the other hand, you're like, that CoPilot Enterprise, I really want some of that stuff. That's where we get to our chocolate and peanut butter scenario, which is start thinking about how do you set up GitHub Enterprise Cloud and move your code out of repos in Git in Azure DevOps over to GitHub. You can still, for example, use Azure Ports. You can still use your pipelines, and then start looking at where it makes sense. GitHub.com is an AI-backed platform. That is our commitment, and that is the driver for both Microsoft and GitHub. Azure DevOps continues to be invested in to make sure that the existing tools, work, but also they've been adding new features, right? You know, Dan Helm and the team working on boards, they continue to add features because customers use that a particular way, and that way may not match the way we've developed projects and issues in GitHub. they're stylistically two different types of products, right? And it's not even as simple as, using an automobile analogy. It's not as simple as, Ford and Chevy. It's more like, motorcycles versus airplanes, right? There are places where things are substantially different, even though they both will get you someplace. Long term, GitHub's the North Star. That's where we're investing in the AI. And so I'd be looking at the places where you can find that chocolate and peanut butter, and then make the decision on your own based upon your needs. And then, yes, at some point, if Microsoft decides that Azure DevOps is not longer this earth, you're going to know about it. We're going to have hopefully a really concise plan on how to do that. And then you can decide, ultimately how you're going to be on GitHub. There's things that we're still working on. Data residency is a critical issue for a lot of customers. And so we continue to work on finding those top pain points that would keep a customer from moving from Azure DevOps to GitHub when they want to, right? We're not trying to force you. We're going to definitely tease you in the sense that there's these new features, that's where they're going to be. That is the commitment that, from the top down, like I said, this comes down from Satya through Julia to Thomas. This is how Azure DevOps works. This is how GitHub works. And this is where we're investing. Because at the top, right, Microsoft has a CoPilot message all up. It has an AI message all up. And that's the current decision. Now, 6 months from now, that could change. I can only tell you what I know today at the point where we're recording this. But today, you should feel comfortable as an Azure DevOps customer, but you should be looking at where the AI is being built and start looking at how you can do that. Step one is get CoPilot in the hands of your developers in their IDs. So VS Code, Visual Studio. That's easy. That works with Azure DevOps. We don't care where your code is. And there's some great features that are in the ID that can mimic even what we have in GitHub.com in some places. But as you start seeing things like, fixed, not found, and you start seeing the things we're doing with CoPilot Workspace, as the future and things we're thinking about, there's going to get to a point where having all your stuff in Azure DevOps won't make sense. You're going to want at least have your code over. You're going to want to have pieces over. And then, at some point, I would love to be able to tell people GitHub.com is as good as Azure DevOps in all the places that really matter, right? That's the goal. And we'll see how we hit that.
So I think that key is where it matters. And that probably changes over time. For example, in just my own projects, GitHub is the best place if the Git repository ultimately yields a library that goes to NuGet. It's, hands down, it's amazing. It's got everything that you would want. And for application development, it's super easy to have a string of environments to production by integrating with Octopus Deploy for deployments and all the different scenarios, even though Actions doesn't, innately cover those right now. Okay, integrate with another product, boom, and you got the whole thing. So then the question is, what does GitHub have to be good at as a first-class feature versus, there's ecosystem of everything and there's all kinds of plugins like static code analyzers. You got SonarQube and all these other things. You just plug them in. Does GitHub have to have every type of, static code analysis or every type of deployment tool or every type of monitoring tool? So, and with Azure DevOps, it came up in VSTS, came up at a time when there was a lot of debate around Scrum and extreme programming. And what should an iteration look like? What's that concept? Is it the thing about an epic and a user story and arranging work and how to do that? And then it's almost like, yeah, let's just do daily or weekly iterations and single piece flow and more Kanban stuff. And so you got all these developments. So what are the important stuff now where maybe, important stuff 10 years ago, okay, it's not so important anymore?
You make a great point there. And, as someone who is a Scrum practitioner and believes in that, and as well as, Kanban, I think the key thing is process is not what's important. It's just like your real customer doesn't care about the language you use. Now, they do in some ways because tech has permeated what's going on. They want to know we're using modern stuff. They want to know we're doing right by them, secure, fast, right? Those are what the customers care about. The things they care about, though, are more abstract. And so when it comes down to process, I tell people, look, the process isn't what's important. What's important is, are you delivering value, right? Value delivery, how you do that. Now, if that is some high ceremony type of way of software development, more power to you. If on the other hand, you have a mature team that people just do their work and do the right thing, what's appropriate, and you just, you jump on a Zoom call once in a while, you jump on Teams or Slack, whatever it is, however you do async comms, or you're all in an office in a team room. I don't care. What I care about is, how does that translate to value? And that's, the ultimate thing, is how do you keep focused on the prize? The prize is delivering value. No one cares about the tools we use. We do, but our users don't. And our job exists to help them.
Right.
And so ultimately, for organizations that are still going through, right, I've always said that DevOps is a journey, not a destination. And while we see the evolution of the industry to where it's not as cool and hip, but platform engineering, that's where it's at. Well, it turns out that that is a thing that works with DevOps, just like SRE works with it, right? Because they're more focused on different pieces of it. And again, platform engineering is often about improving our life, not as much as how it's improving the customer's life. So again, I look at everything we do with tools and tech, and when I look at what GitHub has to do, is how does it help you and your team deliver value? So we got to remove that friction. And step one is help you deliver more secure code. So our focus on, continues to, escalate on that shift left metaphor of finding bugs before they get checked in.
Mm-hmm.
And so those bugs include security issues. That is going to deliver more value than pretty diagrams in the pipeline.
Yeah.
I want that for you. I want a good experience. But again, given the choice, we're going to focus on that. And so I think that's what's critical for the GitHub platform, is everything we do is how do we deliver that value better whenever possible, and less focused on the stuff that makes the developer, the organization happy from a management perspective, right? I'm a firm believer in trusting developers to do the right thing and enable them with the right tools and technology and the guardrails that are necessary. So yeah, policy becomes important, but with as little friction as possible.
Mm-hmm.
We want to provide the best developer experience. We want you to be happy. And so, GitHub, we often, talk about the inner loop and the outer loop. So day-to-day in your IDE, and then over here you have the kind of the DevOps stuff, bring them together. And inside that intersection on the Venn diagram is really where we have CoPilot and AI bringing things together, wrapped in the wonderful bubble of security, right? That is what we are trying to do. And hopefully that long-winded answer what you were trying to get out of me, which is, when I think of the features that are critical, I think it's those day-to-day things that we still have to do, right? I don't see Kanban boards and, the discussion of epics and work tracking as the most critical aspect. I think every organization has to decide what level of tracking they need.
Yeah.
Building airplanes and skyscrapers versus, apps to track, inventory have different needs. I think you need to do just enough management. Stay away from command and control, empower your developers, find what works for them, and ultimately measure a single thing. Are we delivering value? In other words, are we shipping software? And that software then has to meet the needs of the organization. Is it secure? Is it compliant? Is it accessible, right? Every organization has to have their requirements, and then you bring the process that's necessary.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I'm going to tell you. I think Scrum is great for a lot of teams. I think it's really good for teams that have been, Saturday day, lost in the woods. After time, do you stop doing Scrum? Not necessarily, because Scrum's a framework, right? When done right. But again, people get frustrated because they believe that, well, we've not been successful with Scrum, therefore we have to find something new.
Yeah.
Do you, or do you need to just really focus on the thing that we talk about in Agile and DevOps, which is delivering value, right? I've got this book that we wrote called Essential DevOps. So there's lots of good stuff in here. But if I broke it down and told you, what's the, who did it at the end, it's real simple. Deliver value, right? I mean, that's the answer.
For sure.
So I I think GitHub is that's our focus. Mario Rodriguez, who came from the Azure DevOps team, ran the team that builds issues and projects for a long time. He's now our chief product officer. And Mario said from the beginning, I have no intention of rebuilding Azure boards in GitHub projects and issues.
Mm-hmm.
Does that mean we won't have the necessary features to give you most of what's important?
Yeah.
No. Are we going to build a system that lets you customize the way Azure boards does? No, not at this time, because there's Azure boards if you really want that. Second, when we look at software development, that is not a key value driver. And GitHub leads with developer first. We care about everybody else, the security practitioners, the project managers, et cetera. But developer first means we're going to drive from their view up, not this top-down command and control. Well, I need Gantt chart views inside projects. Ain't going to happen. So I'll just leave it at that.
That's a good way to split it up, because a lot of the conversations, 15 plus years ago, were driven by people more in a project manager seat rather than individual people writing code. But what I'm hearing from you is, and just like try and translate, okay, what should I generally do right now? What I'm hearing is get the code in GitHub, because there's so many, by putting the code right now in GitHub and integrating it with all the other tools that I want to use, that's going to give me more value now that it's hard to get in other places. And that's a huge thread that's being heavily invested in right now if my code's in GitHub.
Absolutely. We have tools to help you migrate your repos, high fidelity from different versions of flavors of GitHub. If you're self-hosting, for example, we do Bitbucket migrations and other things, as well as obviously Azure DevOps, and get that over there. Still use your boards. If you need that larger view, more power to you. I'm not saying that's wrong. Use what works for you. But if your code's in GitHub now, you've opened up the door. That the world's now your oyster. And that's, I think, that key is, we view the code as the center of the universe. And so how do we enable you to do what you need to do? So in some places, using Azure boards plus GitHub repos is going to be the best solution. We have some great security tools, but we don't do necessarily everything we talk about releases. So maybe Octopus Deploy works for you. Maybe you need some of the tools from our partner JFrog, because Artifactory helps you manage things better for your enterprise. Just like Microsoft gained that religion, GitHub has always had that religion of we are going to work together with people whenever possible. Yeah, we're going to compete, and there's places we're going to step into markets sometimes that are what our partners are doing, right? Actions competes with Azure Pipelines, with Octopus Deploy, with the world of open source and things like Jenkins. So we have to win by being not just free in places, but good or great.
Yeah.
And I think repos, the world recognizes this is where GitHub stores, this is where the world stores their code, right? And repos as our foundational piece. By the way, we've added some great features the last 6 months. You might be thinking, repos are boring. Nope, we keep adding new things, both for the individual and for the enterprise. And that is your hub, I think, is a great way to summarize that, Jeffrey, which is if you get your GitHub into GitHub Enterprise Cloud, get your enterprise set up, get your code there, and start looking at what meets your needs today and maybe what that 5-10 year looks like. We're going to work hard to win your business across the board, but we recognize we may not always provide the solution you need, and that's where we provide those touch points.
Cool. Well, I want to close up and just touch on a few things to make sure the listeners understand. So the book you held up, let's remind us, what is it? Where can they get it?
So this is Essential DevOps. It is a project that I worked on with a partner of mine, Ian Griffiths, in his company, Engine. And it is a practitioner's book that is not about the product. So you won't learn how to use CoPilot. You won't learn how to use repos. What you will learn is the things we learned over the last, hundreds of person years. But, what are the key things we've distilled from DevOps? We view it as like a complementary text to things like the DevOps Handbook. And it's going to be available on the GitHub shop shortly. So I would dream a dream that it would be available by the time this thing goes live, but you'll have to watch for it. And we are also going to publish the entire book online digitally, so you'll be able to have that. It will be on Amazon.com as well at some point. The best way to find out info on the book and status is just continue to check gh.io/DevOps. And when the book's ready for the world to consume, you'll be able to get it there. And,
All right,
I'm
GH.
getting ready for, we talked about Universe was in the past, but guess what?
Again.
Our 10th anniversary for Universe is coming up at the end of October. So get signed up now, early bird pricing. It's going to be fantastic. We have a new location we're going to be at, more sessions, more fun, more donuts. It's going to be just absolutely wonderful. San Francisco can be amazing in October. So knock on wood, we'll have the glorious, beautiful weather and just lots of, again, two-way conversations, right? That's what I love about Universe is it's an opportunity for you to get on the ground with GitHub. And we're talking from Thomas down, we're there, and we're engaging with you to hear how GitHub can make your life better. We want to hear the good, and yes, tell us the bad and the ugly, and how we can make things better for you. So yeah, that's coming up, and that's going to be the big focus for DevRel coming up in the next few months.
Nice. So gh.io/DevOps. And then there's two other terms that you throw around because they're second nature and you use them all the time. But I want to make sure all the listeners understand what these are. The first one is, what the heck does platform engineering actually mean? And the other is SRE. Just a real quick definition.
Yes.
Just raw definition.
So yeah. So platform engineering is come about from the fact that, as teams start to build complex cloud systems, we need guidance and we need to, again, remove the impediments to get started and do things the right way. So it's kind of focused on, the engineering and automation for the team in that cloud environment that's focused on the way we do it. So, platform engineering on Azure is kind of focused on, well, here's how we do things, and here's the templates, and here's the processes we use to build secure, scalable cloud solutions. So platform engineering is kind of, DevOps, but more focused on the way you do things. So it's a set of learned practices plus your unique organizational knowledge. And Microsoft's got some great stuff on this, and we're continuing to look at how GitHub addresses that as being a multi-cloud vendor. SRE is a term that came out of Google, and God, I'm drawing a blank on
cyber reliability engineering.
Cyber reliability engineering. It was the practice on focused on, it comes related to the you build it, you run it kind of culture. A lot of organizations talk about they do DevOps and they don't really. And the thing that drives me nuts is when I see job titles and groups that are called the DevOps engineer or the DevOps team. That's not what it's supposed to be about. Everybody's supposed to be doing DevOps, okay? Not just a person. SRE is a type of thing which is, I have to have deep knowledge of the production environments and the type of software we're running. This came out of, for example, things like Kubernetes clusters. You don't just walk up and say, I'm going to do Kubernetes today, right? You don't just file new and have a cluster up at the end of the day. I mean, there are tools that will make you think you've done it, but to really run a production Kubernetes cluster, you got to have some knowledge. And so the SRE role was focused on, what is it like to be an engineer that really spends a lot of time both on getting things into the production scenario, but also monitoring and managing, et cetera. And so SRE and platform engineering are complementary to the key tenets of DevOps, right? And at the end of the day, they all focus on the same thing. How do we deliver value and how do we keep that value available, right? Because, once I deploy it, am I done? No, because, software has a life cycle. It's from idea to it's done, to where you take it out of commission. Well, until it's done, the value has to be that it's still available and still works. I have to be able to install it. I have to be able to use it. And when it comes to a cloud-based solution, people expect to be there 24/7.
Right.
And so therefore, those practices we need. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, Brian, thanks so much for coming on the show. I appreciate it. And it's fascinating, all the things that are going on with GitHub and DevOps and actually the strategy of the mindset, what's going to be happening in the future, because that's a hard focus. So thanks for coming on and sharing. This is great. I loved it.
Well, Jeffrey, as you can see, I have no problem jibber jabbering, and I love this, and I'm just glad this is what I get to do. And thank you so much for having me. And just understand, we make that joke, one of us. I'm still one of you. I'm lucky I get to write code every day. I still write C#, T-SQL. I use the tools. And so, I won't tell you to use something if I don't think it's good. And I definitely think things like CoPilot and GitHub are great places to be. But we also understand you have to ship value. And so do what's best for you and your customer. Hopefully that involves GitHub and CoPilot. But if it doesn't, you won't hurt my feelings. Yeah. Focus on that value delivery. If you do that, you're going to be happy. Your customers will be happy. Everybody gets paid, and we can then do the fun stuff, which is hopefully enjoy our family and friends.
Absolutely. Awesome. Well, until next time, dear listener, keep shipping.
You've been listening to the Azure DevOps Podcast, a show for developers and DevOps professionals shipping software using Microsoft technologies. Go to www.azuredevops.show for show notes and other episodes. On behalf of your host, Jeffrey Palermo, and our sponsors, thanks for listening, and may God bless you.